What up, you guys? Welcome back. My name is Nianka Wright, your hostess with the mostest, and I am the creator and founder of A Set Apart Generation podcast. And today we are discussing Jonathan. All right. Jonathan and David's friendship went down as one of the greatest and most beloved friendships in history. All right, let's jump in. All right, so as I'm studying Jonathan, learning his profile, learning his personality, learning, how he pretty much operated in, his life, something said to look up the name Jonathan and what that means, okay? So I look up the name Jonathan, and the name Jonathan means God's gift or Jehovah has given. So just thinking about that name and just knowing how intentional God is, his thoughts being above our thoughts, his ways being above our ways, you can see that Jonathan and David's friendship was a God-ordained friendship. So last week we talked about Judas. Judas betrayed Jesus at the time of his ultimate destiny, which was to die on the cross and save humanity. And you see that Jonathan comes at a time in David's life during his destiny, okay? It came after he was anointed. That friendship was established after, he was anointed by the prophet, because at that time, you see God really moving in David's life, taking him into his destiny. And I'm happy that God shows us and unfold the story this way, because it lets us know that these type of friendships, are ultimately, for sure, without a doubt, equally yoked and appointed by God, because it came at the time that David was stepping into his calling and his destiny, or preparing him, so to speak, to be king. All right, so before we get into Jonathan and David's friendship and, just unpack that a little bit more, I want to discuss David. So a few things. A lot of people speak from different pillars concerning David's life, because David was one of the greatest kings in history. I like to refer to myself as Sister David. I see a lot of his, I just resonate deeply with a lot of his, emotions and personality mindset. That's just me. So we can see that David was a loner. David was not even at the table when the prophet came to anoint him as king. So the prophet goes to Jesse's house. Jesse is like, okay, here are my sons. And, the prophet is sizing up all of the, sons. And he's like, it's this one. And God like, nah, I don't care about his looks. I rejected him. I don't care. No, it's not that one. It's not that one. The prophet like, okay, do you have any other sons? And then Jesse goes, well, by the way, there's David. And at the time, David working out, shepherding, his father's sheep. He was the girlies are calling it the parentified. Is that right? Parentified child. And he was the youngest. I'm thinking to myself, like, Jesse, you got all these sons, but you didn't even know the one who ain't at the table is the one chosen by God. He was a loner. David said, I ain't sitting at the table. But the prophet, knew that God called him and chose him. And he said, we're not sitting and eating until he comes. So God made sure he didn't miss his appointment. He didn't miss his time. And I'm pretty sure David was probably out doing his thing alone. He not even at the table with his father. Can you believe that? Just, you could see that he was ostracized. Also, you could tell that David's brothers didn't like him. He was referred to as deceitful and prideful. You can see that in 1 Samuel 17. So there was some rejection he had to deal with his own siblings. And it's funny to me that his brothers were the one, fighting the army, and they were going to war. But David really was the one who had the heart of a warrior and chosen by God. His brothers called him deceitful and prideful. They were seeing his flaws, but they didn't see God's favor. So, David possibly dealt with some rejection there. And a lot of people like to, build on that pillar of rejection coming from David's life, because God turned all of that around for his glory. Moving on, David was a warrior, yet he had a creative soft side. David played instruments, he wrote music, prayers, and poetry, and you see that in the book of Psalms. And he had such an honest and intimate relationship with God that was so powerful that his prayers, are used to ward off witchcraft, ward off enemies, used in, praise and worship songs, okay? You can see the power and passion in David, creative side, but yet he was a warrior. So you can see that he probably was misunderstood. Last but not least, David was a worshiper. He danced all his clothes before the Lord. My pastor used to say, you can tell a person's true relationship with God based off of how they worship in spirit and truth. You can't just be saying you thanking God and just clapping on the beat. No, David, when they brought that, Ark of the Lord back, David, he brought it into, his dwellings. David was like, listen, I'm going to lift you up, okay? And God is just in heaven getting adorned. That's how the Lord feels when we worship in spirit and truth. So David didn't care about being humiliated in front of others concerning how he looked or how his relationship was perceived. He didn't care about those who judged him. He was okay with being humiliated, even when it came to his wife. In 2 Samuel 6:22, he tells his wife, Michal, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He said, I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. By these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. So basically he was telling her, hey, you feel some type of way about me praising God like that? I'm going to do it even more undignified. I'm going to be humiliated even more. All right, in times to come. And these girls you saying who feel some type of way about me worshiping, actually, they liked it. So David didn't care about how he looked during his praise and his worship and his love and honor towards God, thus solidifying why he was a God. He was a man after God's own heart. So that's just to break down a little bit of David's profile and just see how his heart was and how connected and intimate he was concerning, his relationship with God. He was very honest. He was very open. He was very vulnerable with God, and God loved that. God wants that with all of his children. All right, so let's talk about the parallels and, just wonderful connections between Jonathan and David's friendship. And you guys could, read a little bit more of this in 1 Samuel. I would say start at about 13 or maybe even 14, to get a little bit more of, Jonathan and David's, friendship and the intimacy. You can see how close they was and, just learn a little bit more about that wonderful and powerful friendship that went down in history as one of the greatest friendships of all time. So you see that Jonathan was a trained soldier, yet David was a fierce field warrior. That was a tongue twister. Why did I write that? Fierce field warrior. So in other words, I'm trying to, keep it real, polished for my brother David. But in other words, he was a savage, all right? So Jonathan was probably trained, okay, qualified, sitting in, you've seen the movies where the soldiers have to build up their stamina, go through all these obstacle courses for years and years and years. And here go David out in the field, just a regular smuggler, degler guy, honoring God with, shepherding his father's sheep, all right, being a parentified son, even though he was the youngest. But that's where he learned how to fight, because he had to fight lions and bears. So is that right? Who gonna go toe to toe with a bear with they hands and what did they have? He had like a little, I'm gonna just call it a shank, like, come on now. He is a savage, all right? And David thanks God for training his hands for war in Psalms 144. All right. So David gives God all the glory when it comes to teaching him how to fight. So he gives that honor to God. Jonathan's physical father trained him for battle, yet David's heavenly father, God, trained him. This is where, the school of hard knocks. All right. You ain't got the degree. You ain't got the connects, yet God gave you aptitude and he gave you skill based off of everything you went through, even though the trauma you went through was a little rough, God used that to mold you, to shape you for your destiny. Jonathan and David both trusted God in battle and both gave glory for winning wars. You see, Jonathan, he told his armor bearer, let's go. We're about to roll up on our enemies, just me and you. Maybe God will have our back. All right. And God showed up because Jonathan trusted God and he had a heart of service. And God loved that. And God came through for him. David tells Saul, look, I'm going to take down Goliath. All right. Let me go. Let me go. I'll go do it. So Saul tells him, he like, okay, you know, put this armor on. David like, listen, I don't need this. I'm not used to the polish, the schedule, the training. I'ma just go how I know how to go, how God trained me. And God trained me to use these hands in this slingshot and rocks, okay, and takes down a giant over 9 feet tall. Who gonna do it? Who gonna do it? David. I'll go. All right. And God is looking for someone to say, I'll go. I'll do it. So I love that. So when God ordained friendships, you will notice many destiny similarities between the two of you, right? Like Jonathan and David when it came to war. All right. So story time. One time my mom told me when I was a kid, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and in Detroit there is an island called Belle Isle, all right, off East Side, all right, off of Jefferson. So, some of the parts in the island, they got the sand and stuff. The people are supposed to go swim, and you can go. But the other parts of the island, you have the deep water, and, they separate the land and the rocks, and you're not supposed to go because that water is deep, all right? So here I go. My mom tells me, she catches me. We go out when I was younger. I don't know how old I was, but this story came to the forefront when I was writing about this and studying. And here I go running towards the water. Baby about to jump. My mama turns around, looks at me and says, Mianka. Now, one parent will be like, this child is this child is that, this child is this. But immediately she thinks in her mind, this girl is fearless. Can you imagine in a split second, you're trying to save their life at the same time, and all you can think about is, wow, this child is fearless. It's made me think about, when God had to separate the children based off of, them building up. They about to build their way to heaven. Instead of God saying this and saying God saying that, he said, wow, these kids can accomplish anything they put their minds. He ain't cussing them out. He ain't saying nothing strange. He just saying, listen, I see what you're doing. Now let me separate y'all. So I want you guys to understand that everything that you experience, even in the time of childhood, even in the time of trauma, even in the time of rejection, being ostracized, being misunderstood, being humiliated, God is using that for advancement of the kingdom and your destiny. All right. So don't never think you're unqualified. Don't ever think, oh, I'm too messed up. God like it that way. All right. He said, I'm going to use the least of these. All right. So we also see that Jonathan was sacrificial. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and his sword and his bow and his belt. Jonathan loved and trusted David so much that he gave his armor to David. He trusted him. He believed in him with no ulterior motives. And Jonathan was the rich one. So when you think about a tunic, his sword, his bow, his belt, I'm kind of thinking like, dang, did Jonathan just lay down his whole armor of God for David? You know what I'm saying? And Jonathan was the rich one. I am not going to say he was poor, but, he didn't have the wealth and riches and resources that Jonathan did. And here is Jonathan blessing him with his, his riches and his valuables, all right? David could have said, you know what, I'm going to use this moment to, manipulate Jonathan and get, closer to Saul so I can be, this. Jonathan could have been said, I see God's favor in David's life. I'm going to just stay close. He's younger. I'm older, whatever the case may be. But I'm going to just live off of his glory or live through him. No, he didn't. None of that took place. No ulterior motive. Nobody using nobody. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. No. So when God ordained friendships, It's just pure and honest love. All right. I don't mind being sacrificial for you. Okay. I'm not looking for you as a come up. Okay. I'm not looking for you to, put me on a pedestal or a platform. All right. I'm just loving you because that's just the heart that I have. And when you have a God ordained friendship, that is reciprocated. And you see that in how sacrificial Jonathan was. And if you ask me, the Bible doesn't really talk about David having friends, but it looks like Jonathan being placed in David's life really showed him what godly friendships and God ordained equally yoked friendships look like. Okay. Jonathan was faithful and advocated for David. Now, this is a big one. All right. So Jonathan didn't fully see how jealous and evil Saul was toward David. So the mind that I have when I read the Bible, I have a very inquisitive mind. I'm sorry. That's just how I am with God. I says to God, I say, okay, look, David had to conceal all of this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But can you imagine God appointing you a place under someone and that person is jealous? But I'm asking God, I say, you know what, God, you said your gift will make room for you before a great man, but you ain't say the great man will hate you. Like, come on now. So, David said, I'm telling you, your father is trying to kill me. Saul had such, evil heart towards David. I don't know, was it because of the tormenting spirit? Maybe Saul just had a way of thinking, or maybe Saul just knew that God was no longer with him because of his disobedience. Who's to say? But even still, with all that, Jonathan he did not fold. All right. He stayed faithful to God and he stayed honest to David. All right. And even though Saul was Jonathan's father and the king, Jonathan still had the heart to ask his own father at the table, what has David done to you? This man has done nothing. All right. And, sometimes that's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that Jonathan had that toxic loyalty, but that love you will have, or even that affiliation to someone, you can get blinded of the things in the way that they're moving. Jonathan wasn't afraid to challenge his father concerning David's, transgression, so to speak, or his offense. Like, what did he do to you? Did this person do anything to you? No. But David had to still stay in position, all right, because this is where God had him. This is where God wanted him, all right? So all of that, and when Jonathan, the veil came off his eyes, he still was faithful and he still loved David. Now, how many of you guys can say that? Hey, look, during persecution and opposition, your friend will not fold or switch sides, even if it's their parents, their cousin, they're this, they that. I see God's favor. I trust you. All right. And this is in God ordained friendships. I'm not talking about, toxic friendships. I'm not talking about Judas. I'm not talking about trauma bonding. I'm talking about in God ordained friendships. Jonathan was not afraid to speak up. I can't believe my father would do such a thing. But David was like, he had to conceal all this. And he still honored God. Man, listen. No, Saul is manipulating him, setting him up. And Jonathan has no clue. David had to flee. He had to get out of the vicinity of the destiny destroyer. That person that God places in your life, they will have that healthy view of you even during the low times, because not all of the times where everybody will agree with your decisions, your friends' decisions, but a God ordained friendships knows how to be faithful and still honor God even in difficult and rocky times. So let's ask the $1 million question. Who is that Jonathan in your life? Jonathan could be a good leader, a good friend, good investor, someone who gave you a helping hand, who sees God's glory in you, on you, over you, and do everything they can to put you in position and protect you in your position because, and essentially that's what Jonathan did. So I hope this message helps someone. And on our next episode, we will discuss vulnerability. Now, is vulnerability a strength or is it a weakness? Is letting your pride down and revealing your heart honorable or dishonorable? I'm not talking about me. I'm just talking about in general. Or am I? We'll find out on our next episode. I'm out.